I was on mute. The catchphrase for 2020, which is now 2021 and continues to be the catchphrase. Welcome to Brockton Writers Series, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, March 10th, 2021. As usual, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Brockton organizers do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We acknowledge the ways that colonization, genocide, and racism have impacted Indigenous peoples, and that settlers have a responsibility in making space at events exactly like this for Indigenous voices. We all share the responsibility to critically understand and to challenge forces of systemic oppression. And for many of us, that includes recognition of how our ancestors as settlers have contributed to these colonial legacies with silence and with action. And I'd like to challenge all of you to think about how you're silent and how you act in support of Indigenous liberation. We'd also like to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to feature and center Black and Indigenous voices, other people of color, and other underrepresented groups in our series. And this is embedded in our mandate. So we're required to, we're committed to it. Thank you very much to Ephemera Series for hosting, I don't know, it's one of those words that I can't pronounce right. Ephemera Series for hosting us on their online platform. Their events are the third Wednesday of every month. So their next show is 1 week from today. It's always the week after ours, but they're monthly, they're every month. It's one of my favorite events to attend online. So Wednesday, March 17th, please check it out. For today's lineup, we have a guest speaker, as usual, with a brief Q&A, and then our 4 readers, followed by a group Q&A for them. Each presentation will be a little shorter than we were in person. If any of you here are people that used to come when we were in person, it's a little bit shorter. We skipped the break. There isn't the hobnobbing aspect, but we do have the wonderful aspect of people being here from outside Toronto. So there are pros and cons. Please type your questions into the YouTube chat box as they occur to you. We'll collect them all to ask during the Q&As. So again, don't wait until a Q&A session. If something occurs to you, type it in the chat box then. It's a lot easier for us to collect them if they don't all come at once, and because there also is a bit of a time lag. Emily.
Brockton Writers Series was founded in November 2009. Oh my gosh, that's ages ago, which means we've been bringing literary goodness to Toronto for over a decade. Our Brockton Writers Series volunteers are Hannah Amdemichael, Nancy K. Clark, Dorianne Emerton, Sonia Patare, and I'm Emily Sanford. And we have the pleasure of working together to keep the Brockton Writers Series going. If you'd like to join us, check in with one of us after the readings, and we'd love to hear from you. We would also like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council, who make the series possible. During these pandemic times, we're also indebted to our gracious hosts and friends at the Ephemera Series. Check out their event. And finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight. On to the show. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hosting Jen Sookfong Lee, who will speak to us about the business of publishing and inclusion. Please type your questions, as Dorianne said, into the chat as they occur to you. And now, Jen Sookfong Lee was born and raised in Vancouver's East Side, and she now lives with her son in North Burnaby. Her books include The Conjoined, nominated for International Dublin Literary Award and a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, The Better Mother, a finalist for the City of Vancouver Book Award, The East of East, Gentlemen of the Shade, The Shadow List, and Finding Home. Jen teaches at the Writers Studio online with Simon Fraser University, acquires and edits fiction for Woolsack and Wynne. This is old now, I think. There's a new ECW in the bio, and she hosts the podcast for Can't Lit. So congratulations, Jen, on your new appointment. You can tell us a bit about it, and also welcome. We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. I am still working for Woolsack and Wynne currently. The job at ECW, actually, I don't start till July 1st. So it's not old. I'm just transitional, which is fine. It's fine. Hi, everybody. Coming to you from North Burnaby, very close to Vancouver, which is the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And we're talking today about the business of publishing and inclusion. Heady stuff, lots of stuff to talk about, and I'm gonna keep it at 10 minutes if I can. And I just want to talk a little bit about where publishing is at, and then we're gonna start with some tips and tricks that I have for you, for those of us who are come from marginalized communities or underrepresented communities in publishing, and also for those of us who wish to uplift and make space for those people. So publishing has really been a challenging industry for racialized writers, for queer writers, trans writers. It's been a tough go. Publishing spots have been scarce, like speaking from the author's point of view, and the kinds of narratives that we've been allowed to write or that have been allowed into the marketplace have often been ones that advance certain stereotypes or certain narratives about these communities. And I'll use myself as an example because that's the example I know the best, but I think this is applicable to a lot of people. So for me personally, there was a lot of pressure at the beginning of my career to write a multi-generational immigrant Chinese Canadian novel, which I did, but there's like, mine has ghosts. It's fine, it's different. But I like to call this pressure the Joy Luck Club syndrome, which is no shade at Amy Tan, who I love very much. And she wears like BDSM gear and sings in a rock band and she's cool. So I love her very much, but it's not her fault that this happened to the industry. So my books were often criticized for being too gritty or too violent or too upsetting. And I often wondered if these were the same criticisms that Chuck Palahniuk got, or Hunter S. Thompson, or Cormac McCarthy. Likely not, I assume. So in addition, I think to jobs within the publishing industry, were often held and are often still held by people who we would regard as people who are born with privilege, usually white, straight, and cis. This is changing. I think a lot of publishers, particularly independent publishers, have really actively tried to counteract this with inclusion initiatives, different kinds of hiring, and change has been really sort of more visible with the types of authors that they're publishing, but also has also been quite visible at sort of the entry and middle levels. Where I think it has still stalled is in the managerial and executive level. So there's still some work to be done there. And the reason this is important to us, those of us who are authors, is that without editors or agents or publicists who understand the breadth of author stories, the books themselves can't be edited or promoted in inclusive and sensitive ways, in ways that really respect the places and the communities that people come from. There are lots of reasons for all of this kind of a difficulty, and that have to do with things like access to education, access to sort of mainstream popular literary culture, how we perceive different kinds of cultures and representation. The real question, though, for us who are all involved in this industry as authors or people who work in it, is how do we navigate this space and work in this space in a way that honors the diversity of our stories and our voices and our identities, while uplifting and making space for others who also need that support, because it's a really important part of our work. So I'm going to go into these like things that I think everyone should do. These are all the things that Jen thinks you should do. Mark that down. Number one, ask the hard questions. When it comes time for you, if you're an author, to negotiate a contract or consider an offer on your book or appear at events to promote your work, don't be afraid to ask questions, as many as you need to be clear that your concerns are being addressed, but also that your community's concerns are being addressed. If you're from a marginalized community, it can be really hard to ask probing questions. There's a lot of pressure for people if they feel underrepresented. There's a lot of pressure for us to feel agreeable, or to be agreeable or not difficult. We don't want to be aggressive. We don't want to be angry. But you do have every right to ask about how an editor is going to address, issues of language, for example, or race, or if a festival event that you've been invited to, you're perfectly allowed to ask if it's going to be accessible or inclusive, or if a publisher is going to help you pay for a sensitivity reader. These are all questions we're allowed to ask. And it's important too that writers who feel like they have privilege in those spaces and have a voice can ask similarly hard questions about inclusivity, about events, accessibility, who else is being published in an issue of a journal or this season at a publisher. Can we share promotion resources if someone else who is marginalized needs that support? And I think that people with privilege, I think, always need to be aware that can be very hard for someone who is marginalized or someone who is emerging even to advocate for themselves. These are very hard things to do. And one thing that I've learned in my many long years here in publishing is that everything that has to do with the business of writing is open for negotiation, and there is nothing wrong with that. We do work in a business, in an industry, and we can ask questions, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So the second thing that I think everyone should do is, if in doubt, ask for a second opinion. If you can't come to an agreement about a contract or an event, reach out to your network of other writers and mentors, whoever else, to see what they think. One thing I've learned is that writing is not a solitary activity. It takes a community to care for the individual, and it takes individuals to uplift a community. So we're very fortunate in Canada to have organizations like the Writers Union of Canada, the Writers Trust. There's a lot of sort of writers organizations that will help answer questions, that will try to make the community and address equity. And there's lots of resources like the how-to series of booklets that the Writers Union publishes that includes really important information about taxes and contracts. I just got one in the mail about literary estates, which means I'm close to the end of my career, I guess. Cool, thanks, Readers Union. But publishing is a hard business that doesn't offer a lot of job security or a lot of money. So I think that without each of us holding each other up and definitely sharing our resources and information, none of this is possible, both in terms of business, but also in terms of mental health and your self-care. These are all things that are really important. The third thing I want to talk about is everybody has to sit down and determine what you're comfortable with. We all have different comfort levels for what we will write about, how we will promote our writing, and what topics we will discuss in public. During the publishing process, it's important to think about what your boundaries are. You know, for example, some of you who are racialized might be comfortable talking about race in an event meant to promote inclusion, but some of you may not, and that's totally your choice and your boundary. As time goes on, these boundaries can change as your career changes, these boundaries can shift, and it's really important to check in with yourself regularly to reassess what you need or you don't need, and to make sure you're still staying on track with your limits. I want you to be really in touch with yourself. This applies to burnout too, and how much we work. One of the things that I've noticed in this business is that every year there will be a new emerging writer, and you know, every year it seems there can only be one emerging writer who is racialized who gets real famous. I don't know if this is true, but this is my perception of it. And I find that that emerging writer will be carrying a lot of responsibility for their community. They will be also under a lot of pressure for their careers and think that they have to jump in on every controversial topic on Twitter, or think that they have to create all this free content, or think they have to say yes to every event. But I'm here to say you don't have to. People like me who work in this industry, my interest as a mentor or as an editor is being able to help writers build sustainable long-term careers. And in order to be sustainable, you have to know what your boundaries are. And it has to mean that you will say no when you have to say no. So those are the three things that I think everyone should do. I might have said there were four, but listen, I'm not good at math. I'm sorry. So in conclusion, so when things are quiet and we're getting a lot of rejections, I think we start to believe that we'll never be able to reach our writing career goals. And I don't just mean publication or the Giller Prize or Canada Reads. Sometimes our career goals are a little bit more intimate, things like stable housing, holidays, retirement funds. We can often think that all of these are for people with regular jobs and not for us. But it's possible, I think, to have goals and to work toward them. I just really want people to be mindful and engaged with your business practices, whatever they are. And that includes, like I said before, boundaries, scheduling, your money, your finances, what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. I think right now we're at a transition point where inclusion and things like how people who are from underrepresented communities have been paid lower advances than others. And all of these things are being openly discussed, which is like awesome. And these are things that were like, there was a cone of silence around these things when I was younger. And I think we have to be able to ride this wave and turn it into real change as we move forward. So I want to make sure that there's enough cake for everyone in this wonderful industry we call publishing. So that's it. So I guess now, if anyone has questions for me, I think I made it under 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm just looking at questions here, and Dorianne will be posting any in the chat too as we go along. Dorianne would like us all to know that she likes cake. So
who doesn't like cake?
I'm not a huge cake fan. Either the band, I know.
You like pie?
I like pie.
That's fine.
In all figures.
I
yes.
was going to say, is that naughty? Okay.
Jen, I do have some questions for you.
I do want to point out a comment in the chat that I think is very fair, which is that there's join the Writers Union. There's a comment that says join the Writers Union, which is very fair. But then another comment that points out that membership is expensive, and realistically, for the Writers Union to attract more members from equity-seeking groups, it should consider a more equitable membership pricing structure.
I have an answer for that.
Yeah.
I have an answer for that. I was on the committee that changed our membership criteria for the Writers Union. So now what's happening is it's a point-based system. It's not based on your number of books necessarily. It's a number of different kind of writing or publishing credits or education credits that go toward being eligible for a member. If you find that it's too expensive for you, I encourage you to call the Writers Union office, because they have a bunch of discount stuff depending on what your circumstance is or what community you come from or whether you're still in school. And if you really do find that it's too expensive for you, I encourage you to call the office. They will do everything they can to make it accessible for you. That's all.
That is very good to know. That's good insider information, and thanks for being on the committee that brought about that change. Speaking of change, I have a question about change. Is there one great positive change that has happened in the last little while that you can sort of land on that is made a big difference? For me, once I started joining, when I started sort of interacting on Twitter, I started to realize that, oh, there was a community and you could just ask questions generally, and sometimes people will answer and chip in, and people are generally really helpful. Have you noticed that there's one great positive thing that has happened to make a big difference?
Yeah, if we're talking about social media, I have found that there are a lot of ills with social media, but on the positive side of it is that people who have differing levels of comfort with being vocal are much more likely to ask questions on social media, because there's a level of distance or protection. And just from my own experience as like an Asian woman, typically Asian women often feel like a lot of pressure to not say anything, controversial or political. Clearly, that's not my problem, but I think for some other people, that's an issue. And I think that social media has definitely given, particularly from my point of view, sort of like Asian women a voice and something to go to like ask questions. And I think this is very true for publishing. Very true for those people who have felt unseen in our industry for a really long time. And I love to see, so there's like the BIPOC publishing Twitter account, for example, which I love to see people complaining. I know it sounds strange, but without those complaints and without a movement to say, yes, you're right, this has happened to me also, which could only happen on social media, I think, especially with COVID. Without any of that, the real change doesn't happen. And I'm really happy to see all of these sort of like initiatives with different publishers and different committees and different advisory panels to tackle this topic. And so, yeah, for that. And I don't think any of that was possible, honestly, without Twitter, which is like weird to say, but there it is.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's we're able to find each other. which has always been an important thing for a community building.
All the weirdos can find each other now, which is awesome.
On the other side of that coin, is there one really big, hairy issue that really needs to be solved? That's, I mean, one, of course, there are many, but is there something like, if we could flip a switch on something?
Yeah, I would really, honestly, I would really love it if the industry, and what I said before is that they will usually focus on like one emerging writer a season, and that's the big star. And I feel like that's a little bit too much scarcity for my liking. And what bothers me about it is that I can see writers burning out, but I also see that there are lots of writers who are not getting all that attention, whose work deserves a lot of attention. And it really hurts my heart when books that are really good don't get the attention that they deserve. And for whatever reason, whatever confluence of events. And I wish there was like, maybe someone needs to start a social media account for books that haven't gotten enough attention in a season or something. I would love to see that happen. I'm a little busy, but I would love someone else to do it.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Is that sounds like a great project, but somebody would have to take that on, and they'd have to take that on for no pay.
Yeah, zero pay.
Unless there's the money. And I think that's what marginalized writers are, we're told all the time, that, like, publishing is cutthroat because there isn't money. People don't buy books anymore. They read everything on the internet. Like, how valid is that? Is there really such a dearth of money for writers that the industry cannot afford these things?
It's hard for me to say because I've never been a writer that got paid an awful lot, but I will say that so there was a hashtag what publishing paid me, I guess it was a year ago, that like people were talking about what their advances were. And I have never felt so bad about myself in my life, because what I was seeing is that writers who were my peers, who came into the industry at the same time as I did, had the same number of books that I did. There was literally one writer, we're in fact the same age, whose last advance was 20 times. And I felt so bad. And then, so my question is, those 6-figure advances that supposedly exist, why? And why then are some of our like poets getting paid $200 for an advance? Like, can someone explain? And that's where I would go. I'm not a business person. Like, I couldn't tell you exactly why that occurs. Do those advances ever earn out? Probably not. Like, how many books you'd have to sell for that to occur. But yeah, that would be that's the one thing that drives me nuts about the money, because I think there could be enough money for everyone to do their jobs and have like a nice sustainable income. I think there could be.
Well, wouldn't that be nice? I think a nice sustainable income would be one flip the switch. I think we could all
20 times, I'm telling you.
That's bananas.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. That's bananas.
Okay.
All right. Do we have any other questions from the folks on the YouTube?
No, there is an interesting chat going on about the writers union memberships, but I think Jen said you've got to call to get them. So which is also, I understand why you wouldn't just offer them on your website, because everybody's going to ask for them, but then I don't know, calling can also be a barrier in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Anything can be a barrier, right? Like website access, phone access, like it's hard to make everything accessible, but we should all try. Mm-hmm. So I'm very glad you affected that change for the Writers Union, and hopefully it can become more known. Well, hopefully it become more known, because obviously people don't know that they have to call to get it, so that is something.
Also, I would say about the Writers Union, even if you're not a member and you've got like a contract issue and you're worried about something, you can call the office and ask them questions. They're happy to answer.
Really?
Yeah, I did that when I was like 27 and had no publishing credits to my name. Just call.
All right. Okay. Let's hear it for Pluck. Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to sell my first novel right now, and I'm just like, I don't know how to do this. Sorry, Emily?
was just going to say it's good to get into practice of just being clear. One of the things that we've fairly recently changed about Brockton is when we send out the email with information for people, we always just put what our diversity clause is, so they don't have to ask, because that will immediately put them at ease. But as a writer, you can also do that. You can also just like put a diversity clause for all of your, yes, I'd like to speak on the panel. Just to have your diversity clause as part of your signature at the bottom, saying I prefer to be on a panel, obviously, that has diversity.
Yeah, and I would add accessibility to that too.
Accessibility.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And do any of our fellow readers here tonight have any questions for Jen before we go? I want to open the floor to all of you as well if you have any questions. No pressure.
Okay. All the pressure.
Well, it is good because we're pretty much on time. Look at that. We're coming right up on 7 o'clock. So usually at this point, usually at this point, we would hand around a pitcher for Pay What You Can donations to help support Brockton and our writers. We do pay everybody. And, thank you very much to OAC and the people that give us money, but we also do really welcome donations from our audience. So we can't pass a picture. Usually at Glad Day, there would be a picture going around for you to drop your extra change in. That is not possible right now. So we've got a PayPal that I will drop in the comments. So if you're able to, just email us a few dollars, even if it's $2, doesn't matter, like a few dollars, every bit helps to keep independent events like ours and marginalized writers going. And now we will have the readers. Again, please type your questions into the chat as they occur to you. There's a bit of a delay. We'll also be gathering those questions so that we can ask them all at the end. So it's better if you have the questions in there. So first up, we have Gavin Jones, a writer, poet, self-publisher, and educator who is based in Toronto. He's a past student of York University and author of From Suicide Kit to Liberating Liberty, a coming-of-age LGBTQ+ novel about identity, sexuality, and self-acceptance. He's also working on 2 other young adult fiction books and a self-help guide for youth and adults to overcome emotional trauma. Gavin is passionate about working with young people. He believes in the power of storytelling to connect with youth locally and around the world. Gavin has also established a tutoring program to assist youth from low-income families to develop learning skills in the areas of high school math, English, and science. Take it away, Gavin.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here this evening, Brockton Writers. So this evening, I'll be reading from my newly published book. I published it last October, during COVID-19. So that was a success for me during that time. So the title of the book is called From Suicide Kit to Liberating Liberty. And I wrote this book basically to just shed light on an experience that I had meeting a young girl who happened to be a lesbian. And so I took the story and I just try to narrate something that could speak to other youths out there and to parents and to individuals who may come in contact with individuals who struggle with their sexual identities. So I'm gonna start off by reading the very first chapter of the book. The very first chapter is called One's Destiny. Liberty climbed down from the attic with her shoebox tucked underneath her arm. As she walked into her room, she whispered to herself, "I can't do this anymore. I hate how I feel inside. I want to end it all today." She sighed and held onto her box tightly, but the fear inside her wanted to let it go. It was the type of roller coaster fear that sends shivers all over her body. Even though she wanted to let it go, she trembled and held on as tightly as possible. She opened the box and shuffled through it. Finding the previous notes she had written, she gently picked one out. It read, I somehow wish I was still 7 or 8. My thoughts were innocent then, and I only wanted to be a little girl. She slowly put the note down and continued to go through the contents of the box. She found a handheld mirror. Liberty inspected the mirror as though she was seeing it for the first time. The mirror was black, except for the handle, which was gold. On the back, she had written, "My best friend." And beside the words were two heart-shaped rainbow stickers. She looked in the mirror and studied her beautiful dark skin. Liberty, however, did not think she was beautiful. She thought she was the ugliest 15-year-old alive. She examined the tiny freckles on her cheek and gently touched her coarse hair. And as she studied her features, she began whispering out loud, "I am sick and tired of this dreaded feeling I have inside. I hate my thoughts, my complex thoughts. I wish I could take a knife and pluck away that part buried so deep inside me. I wish I could castrate the root of every hormone and emotion that evoked this awful feeling." Tears ran down her cheek as she stared at herself in the mirror that was shaking in her fragile hands. "Liberty, you're crazy," she said to herself as she chuckled and smiled wryly at her reflection. She took a long pause and looked at the box once more. Tucked in the left side of the box was a burgundy pocket Bible. She hesitantly reached for it. Liberty stared at the Bible with a heavy heart and a lot of uncertainty. Finally, she picked it up and began turning the pages, but immediately closed her eyes. Unknowingly, she began to pray. "God, I know you love me. I know you made me special. I know I have a purpose. But why would you make me this way? Why would you put such complex emotions in me? I hate how you made me, God. I hate this thing about me." Liberty sighed and opened her wet eyes. Her young life was stitched with the fabrics of heartbreak, disillusionment, self-hatred, and fear. She was now at a stage in her life where she was discovering herself and began to feel emotions she had never felt before. Some of those emotions were deemed unconventional. Being a young Black girl from a strict conventional Christian family, Liberty was not allowed to engage in certain activities. She was expected to be the good Christian girl, the poster child for Christianity. She feared her parents, and she never wanted to disappoint them. So she tried her best to be the young girl that they wanted her to be. Her eyes were now lost in the box as they were intensely fixed on the words that were written inside the cover. A lone tear ran from her right eye and rested in the crevice of her lips. She inhaled deeply. Liberty inspected each letter that made up the words. She thought about the sounds the letters made and what they meant to her. She remembered the day she played dress up with her cousin, Toby. Toby had brought his mother's high heels and pink lipstick to the basement. They smeared lipstick on and strutted around the room in the heels. She reminisced about how young and innocent their 8-year-old selves were. Another tear ran down her cheek, but this time it didn't touch her lips. She blinked twice and the words on the cover of the box became clear: "Suicide Kit." After a long sigh, Lauren began speaking to her reflection. "I want to tell someone about the things I'm feeling inside. I wish more than ever someone could look deep into my eyes and see everything that was going on inside me." Do all teenage girls feel this way? Are they also overwhelmed with these confusing sexual feelings, feelings of shame and the burden of continued secrecy? I'm afraid to speak with the youth leader at my church. What if they judge me and think the worst of me? I'm afraid they will tell my parents about what I share with them. The church condemns and banishes people like me. They would judge me and say all manner of evil things about me. How can a young girl really understand what's going on at this stage of her life if no one will listen and understand? God, I hate myself. I hate my existence. I hate looking at the reflection of my parents' innocent child, knowing that I am a disappointment. I'm afraid of being different. I'm afraid of what everyone else will say about me. I am confused about who I am. Isn't it wrong to look at another female with lust? Isn't this a sin? The type of sin pastors preach about in church? They say these feelings are wrong, but they feel so right to me. Why was I born with such an unwanted burden? Why is it so wrong, but feels so right at the same time? How is it these feelings bring me so much comfort when I'm around some of my friends, yet I'm filled with anxiety when I want to express these feelings? How do I confront my mother and father with such a thing? They will disapprove of me and disown me. I've heard and seen how they treat people who are different. My parents are very homophobic and they scorn people who are homosexual. I wish I was still innocent. I wish these thoughts and feelings lay dormant. I wish they never reached puberty. I wish they remained where all my unwanted behaviors are. Now, God, do you understand why I no longer want to live? She grew pale and wary as she questioned God, but her mind didn't stop there. Liberty thought back to 1 year ago when she was 14, when she could not understand or truly process what was happening to her brain and her body. She had written a 5-page letter telling her parents how devastated and confused she was feeling. Liberty told them how she hated being a teenager and that she didn't understand all these new changes she felt within her. Liberty, a gentle and caring girl, had become closed off and easily angered. She would also isolate herself from her siblings. She wanted them to understand and help her to come to a realization of what was happening to her. But Liberty knew she could not tell them exactly what she was feeling. Her parents, being Christians, looked at the situation one-sided and were convinced some type of demonic entity had entered their child's body. Her parents even speculated that someone may have given her drugs. They thought she had a boyfriend and that he might be influencing her to behave badly. Their assumption about the drugs were based on a recent news report that read, high school students caught selling pot-laced brownies to their classmates. They considered every possible teenage challenge they could wrap their heads around. However, there was no suspicion that their innocent baby girl could possibly be a lesbian. Her parents thought the one thing that could help Liberty was to invite the church to pray for her. Liberty wanted to be cured, so she agreed to the prayer meeting. The prayer group visited, they prayed and rebuked demons from Liberty. They anointed her head and body with oil and convinced her God was going to work a miracle. Liberty's desire to be cured led her to believe everything they were saying. She wanted to be a new girl. Therefore, she absorbed every word of healing and restoration that was preached upon her. She wanted to be normal, and she wanted to feel secure. As her thoughts subsided, Liberty found herself clinging to the Bible, as though it was the only hope she had. It was, in fact, her only hope. It was the same Burgundy Bible her grandmother had given her. She gently removed it from her chest and saw the words written in cursive letters on the front page. Whoever you choose to be, whatever you become, God loves you. Those words written by her grandmother gave her some hope that everything was going to be okay. And I'm going to stop there. That's the very first chapter, from Suicide Kit to Liberating Liberty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gav. 15, wow. You couldn't pay me to go back there, and I really hope Liberty hears loud and clear it gets better. It gets better.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gav. Next
thank
up,
you.
we have Natasha Ramoutar, who is an Indo-Guyanese writer by way of Scarborough, Gannet Sekwayagon, at the east side of Toronto. She is the author of Bittersweet with Mawensi House in 2020, a volunteer with the Fold, which is the Festival of Literary Diversity, and the co-editor of Feelways, an anthology of Scarborough writing. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here on this lineup. So the first one, as Emily mentioned, I'm the author of Bittersweet, and so I'm going to read one of the poems from this collection, and it's called Like Makeshift Crowns. Could we speak about joy for once? About July nights by the lake? About dripping marshmallows over the rising smoke of the bonfire? About the laughter that filled our bodies, got caught in our throats as coughs, in our eyes as tears? Of the 5 of us tripping over stray branches in the rouge of toes pressed in the sand around a withering fire? Of stretched nights squeezed in a McDonald's booth meant for four. Of us comforter-wrapped slugs on worn basement carpet, hair piled atop our heads like makeshift crowns. Joy is not a whispered story, but a wailing manifesto of rampant roots reaching for the heavens, of tides pulled to shore by a wanton moon, of flecks of dried ketchup painting the table, of the weathered stars winking at us through the 4x6 window. We drive out under the vast night sky, looking up at the moon through the sunroof, the bass from the stereo shaking the frame of the car as if it's laughing. Could we speak about dreams? About us making a wish on the star falling into the lake for more nights like this, where we line up along the rocks, toes grazing the water, our giggles rising with the tide as if to say, I am here. Thank you. And I'm also going to read a few new pieces as well. The first one I'm going to read is called Tamagotchi. And it's a bit of a little kind of nostalgic-esque poem. In 1,000 years, this poem will be forgotten too, like an unopened email in the trash, like a dream lost to vicious waking. I ask the earth instead to cradle our long dead devices, hold rusted gears in mercy. Not all these love stories merit monument, but every story is worth its weighty moments. The first time your heart beats like that hungry digital pet, its fingerprint soiled on the hem of your shirt, or when a heavy silence traced your shoulders so gently that you'd already abandoned thoughts of swapping the eroded battery. Language loves to struggle against feeling, stays fickle to meaning, but I hope these words are worth something in the end. Should the sand and soil be more generous than time, I ask them to remember us. Tangled toes, soul to soul, pollen in our eyes, our fingernails leaving dirt on a shared screen. The next one I'm going to read is called Second Hand to the Clockmaker. Do you think the time is linear or cyclical? I've been thinking about the milliseconds that pad the space between my fingers, about the minutes clinging to their titular hand. Sight is an honest friend, reminds me that the day moves briskly when I fix each clock's ivory face, when I polish silver with salt water, grin as its shine dims. I see how the sun favors you, you keeper of time, you master of clocks, how your nimble hands align gear tracks, how you seem to find eras hidden in the moments I am given. Island time isn't always late as you insist, just staggered, the seconds chasing after themselves, the shadows stretching with sunlight's kiss. You have already left behind my timeline for a new millennium. By moonlight, I yearn to rip our hands from dials, slash every hanging pendulum. When I ask if time is linear or cyclical, what I'm really wondering is, when a broken clock is right twice a day, where do the other moments go? So I have two more that I'm going to read. The first one is a very, very short one from the collection, and it's called Famous Players. And the epigraph for it is from Adrienne de Leon's poetry collection, Rouge. Adrienne is a dear friend of mine, also from Scarborough. And the epigraph reads, "The hub of life is dead today," and it's from his poem, Scarborough Center. And this poem is called Famous Players. Wayfaring wanderers among the aisles of clothing, we'd parade in suits in the empty change rooms, hold cheap plastic pearls up to our ears in the mirror until we were chased away. Vagabonds with stray loonies amidst our pocket lint, smuggling chocolates into an uninhabited theater. We clutched hands below kernels of popcorn, lips smeared with melted butter as the screen filled our eyes with promises that touched the center of us. Childish drifters looking for life in an abandoned mausoleum. And then the last one I have is called, it's also a new piece, it's called It Keeps Us Here. The epigraph for this one is actually from Shazia Hafiz Ramji, and it's her poem Astronaut Family, which is one of my favorite poems ever, I would say. And the epigraph reads, "This is the quality of dust. It takes us dancing into houses and galleries until 6 in the morning. It keeps us here." The cab driver says everything in Vancouver skyrocketed after the Olympics. And I feel relieved that Toronto wasn't eligible, but unsettled by the narrow miss. The truth is, my own home was just one subway line away from being a carbon copy with a smaller shoreline. Perhaps these cities have always been twins born apart. When these buildings are raised, nothing but broken brick and splintered wood, do our footprints look identical in the dust? Do your dreams, unlatched from this place, ride out the summer breeze, tangle with my own atop rusted jungle gyms? The poet said that this is the construction of an act of love, that poetry is a construction of an act of love. So I lay each line like steel frames and wooden boards, cement adjectives to each dodgy noun. Ask metaphors if they might carpet the floor just for a moment, so I can invite you in. So we can sit around a drafty living room, sipping tea and trading stories. I think that solidarity is built in both love and pain. I think that kinship is when I am looking through a window at you, only to see myself looking back. Thank you.
That was beautiful. And I hope you don't take offense. I kind of dropped in the comments, like, are you dating yourself, referencing Tamagotchis? Because I remember Tamagotchis, and I don't think young people remember Tamagotchis, but those were a thing. Sort of a very important status symbol for people of a certain age at a certain time. You know, before Zoom, I think. Okay, so next up we have Andrew Wilmot, who is one of my favorite people online and in writing. Andrew is an award-winning writer and editor and co-publisher of the magazine Anathema, Spec from the Margins. Their first novel, The Death Scene Artist, an epistolary horror story of body dysmorphia, gender dysphoria, and self-destruction, is available from Buckwriter Books /Woolsick and Win. For more, check out andrewwilmot.ca. Please take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Dorianne. And thank you, everyone. I'm really glad to be here with all of you tonight, even if I'm low-key anxious. I was going to give a bit of a preamble about the book, but the bio essentially covered it. But I do want to give a small content warning, because Jen mentioned in her talk in the beginning about how we all have to kind of find our own comfort levels, what we're comfortable with. And I'm comfortable with horror, especially body horror, partly because most of what I write about is my own experiences with body dysmorphia, gender dysphoria, and all kinds of fun stuff around that. So I'm going to be reading from my first book, which Jen also edited, so I can blame her for some things, but I never would. And yeah, so just keep in mind, horror. This is from a chapter called The Buddy Holly Incident. You wore the life of Richard Thorne for our first real date. Richard, the upstanding encyclopedia salesman, who wore his dress slacks to Saturday nights at the malt shop and his black, nearly knee-high socks to bed, even in the summer. Richard, who made his first dollar painting the white picket fences of his very Pleasantville-esque neighborhood at the age of 8. and from that moment on believed in his heart the virtues of a self-made man, of a capital C capitalist, of the American dream, TM, that never existed except on paper. It was late April when we next met on the set of a mid-century tragedy. I was Eleanor, just Eleanor. She was a simple sleeve I'd pulled from the back of my closet to match the vague, surname-less description provided in the daily call sheet. A slender, barely old enough to vote white slip, wearing a light blue knitted cardigan over a pale pink tailor blouse with a Peter Pan collar. Eleanor had been a good girl, a God-fearing choir girl, too kind for her own good, too eager to dance with the very first boy to ask for her hand. I remember how sweet and out of place she seemed when I met her one evening during my 3rd year living in the city. She seemed so naive. It was like she just walked in off a farm. I found her bussing tables at a diner out in Santa Monica and smiled when she came up to me and asked with a zero-gravity lilt in her voice if I wanted cream with my coffee. How soft and impossibly blemish-free her skin appeared later that night, crouching in the bushes outside her apartment after walking her home, as I sheared her down to the bone with a scalpel I'd stolen from a walk-in clinic. 2 long slits on either side, starting at the shoulders and running all the way to her toes. I took careful steps to banana peel her delicate flesh without tearing it at the edges, crying as the overwhelming scent of libraries, of damp, moldy, time and water-damaged paperback novels flooded out of her, as I imagined it would be like for her skin to fit my body half as well as it did hers. I'd stolen limbs before, a face or two in my youth, pretending I had skills and experience beyond the boundaries of the narrow bubble in which I lived. But Eleanor's was the first sleeve I'd stolen in its entirety. I wasn't prepared for it either. The amount of skin, how little it seems when on our bodies, how much it expands, how much there really is when you lay someone flat and see the full extent of their shell. The plastic container I brought for her was too small. Her arms and legs flapped in the wind, caught halfway beneath the lid that no longer fit, as I sprinted away from the scene of the crime, sheltered by the night. I would get her home, though, no matter what. I would keep what remained of her safe and secure until I had occasion to pull her off the rack. It was my sister, Louise, who, many years ago, first caught me wearing another face, a girl in my 10th grade homeroom named Brianna Mears. Bri was athletic and popular and got good grades. She was everything I wasn't but wished I could have been. One day, while Bri was walking home from school, I pulled her into the woods behind her house and told her how pretty she was and how I wanted to be just like her. She laughed and said that was impossible. Then I picked up a stone shaped like an arrowhead and jammed it into the side of her face and carved her skin away as if etching a bas-relief out of clay. She screamed until she passed out on the forest floor, and I continued sawing an outline around the edges of her face. It was rough at first. The stone made a sound with every severed muscle, like a steak knife through a tenacious vein of fat. The scent of pumpkin pancakes drenched in cinnamon and maple syrup wafted out from the gap in her flesh. I remember salivating slightly. It had been some time since I'd enjoyed such decadence. Hyperosmia, a doctor would later say, one of the ones Mom took me to when my high school weight loss became too great to ignore, an intense acuity for sense, sometimes brought on by sudden or extreme starvation. When I finished cutting, I slipped my fingers beneath her skin and tugged 3 times before hearing the slop of what sounded like a rubber boot stepping in rainwater fresh mud. Her face came free in my hands. The next morning, Louise came into my bedroom while I was busy kneading the loose fresh of Bree's face over my own, one layer of skin on top of the other as if it were an ill-fitting Halloween mask. "What are you doing?" she asked while I stood there, shocked by her sudden appearance. It's not what you think," I stammered, as I tried to think of a believable excuse for why I was massaging another person's skin on my own, the stain of what little blood remained traveling down the V of my neck. For several seconds, Louise stared at my reflection in the mirror, her own face a mixture of confusion and disgust, and then, at last, concern. She nodded once, slowly, and backed out of my room, gently pulling the door until it clicked shut. She wouldn't speak to me again about the matter until a month after Dad's funeral, when she told me she understood if there were certain things I didn't feel like I could talk to her about, that it was okay to be me, and that I didn't ever have to wear a second skin around her. "Because we're all we've got," she said, as I slowly removed the face and hair of a young woman I'd met only a week before in a park across the street from my school, and smiled at her lovingly as myself. I apologize if that was too much.
Thank you, Andrew. That was not too much at all. It was wonderful. And thanks for the warning ahead of time, just so that we could prepare. Next, we have Laila Malik, who is a diasporic Desi writer in Etobicoke, traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. She has been published in various literary magazines and thrice shortlisted for creative nonfiction prizes, and is a recipient of an OAC grant for her first volume of poetry, which is forthcoming. Welcome, Laila, and we look forward to your reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to read with you. It's been a pleasure to hear the work of all of these great writers. The pieces I'll be reading tonight are from a manuscript I'm in the process of finalizing, and I don't want to over-explain them, but just for context, the first one is inspired by a 400-year-old tree in the middle of the desert where I grew up, and it's sort of a rumination on how the land might tell a sideways story of that place, as well as maybe some warning around our relationship to that land. So the first piece is called Acacia Honey. The taproots of this undead thing suction secret life from nitrous skies, burrowing a sediment archive. This last ancestor, anticline islanded, garlanded by a filth of lovers with sweet skins, card vessels stained black with ambrosia, bark bloodied with the passion of 1,000 dull rust blades. All the while, worker bees beat veined hamuli across oceans, heave pollen dreams, swollen with home fictions, off to pull nectar from salt. Remember when they called it 2 seas? Drunk on an earth that could birth twins, sweet and saline, beginning a life's work of dissolution. Just humans air swimming, dry-eyed, clumsy limbing, just humans still finger counting camels and petrochemicals, throats slow filling with wet fire, engulfing true names and membranes, tsunamis and tectonics, birthing new horizon lines, just humans still dancing, Fijeri feet on a rising tide. Second piece, it's funny to read in this moment when people are traveling much less than they used to, but it emerged in a different moment when I was observing the ways that people, and especially people from this part of the world, often seem to become instant experts when they travel to or through places that are new or unfamiliar to them. A special combination of ignorance and arrogance. And by contrast, the deep and complex histories that are invisible to them. The second piece is called The Organic Properties of Sand. Before you were born, gods traded in silences, worked blood into earth, mud wombs hosting tiny hominid spines, ever fetal courting serpents and seeds. You, an eastbound bird, bright-eyed millennial, aluminum husked, God your own way from up there, gray sand with a stopover snickertini, eye rolls behind glass, just dust and towers, tumbleweeding through nothing. Naked eye, baby blind to beyond, teeming life stories of particulate matter, never mind plasticine mollusk songs still circling. Never mind the first flood, Gilgamesh and his jigsaw heart, necropoli of eternal youth, each generation with brave new names, breathless, bloodthirsty with hope. Or oil rigs. Drill bits spew flecks of black gold, Never mind hungry blue eyes, fine aqueous membranes perforated en route, cocktailing sweet with brackish, so sorry. Never mind. Only the poor know thirst. And in the desert, when sun sets on Orem and crude, we still dream water. After dark confessions, coastlines eat their feelings, fading memory of mangroves buried alive. Never mind last rites for dying coral. History's a weapon of mass destruction. You return to Babylon, lounging against loot, painstakingly woven by brown hands, trade fables with false idols, monopoly money, Disneylands for gluttonous sheikhs, gulping great draughts from tiny slivers of God. The last piece I'll be reading is from the second part of the manuscript I've been working on, which grapples with a theme that's familiar to many migrants, as well as people who think of themselves as part of displaced or repositioned diasporas. It's about how you contend with the shape-shifting, moving target of family and community histories, and how you come to a place where you give yourself permission to become an agent in creating those histories and not just a fumbling archivist. It's called All Your Grandmothers Have Stopped Cooking. This is how we know the world is ending. The grandmothers have set down their doys, and there is no succession plan. The grandmothers are stubborn in their armchair naps, dogged in their deafness, committed to crosswords and iPads, days punctuated by scheduled medications and short-lived roomy rages about rain and satellite dish reception. You will ask me for the family shalgam recipe. I will nod, as though I've waited my whole life for this. I will launch WhatsApp inquiries and Google investigations seeking a legend to the map of your veins. I will ask whosoever still breathes and cares, whosoever holds fragments unbloodied with grudge. I will stitch the patchwork and call it our flesh. We will not use mustard oil because it is banned in this country, as well as unneighborly, also because erucic acid will kill you. We will buy garam masala from the desi store, some sweaty stranger's measure of spices grown, ground, and packaged in an undisclosed facility marginally closer to your so-called point of origin, misting carbon across oceans to get to you. I will cross-check whether a shalgam is a standard turnip or some other hyperlocal brassica, and fret over the algebra of red meat. Beef is too tough, lamb is too distracting, goat is rangy, and what actually is mutton? Behind this, planet whispers sit like lead on the gilt gullet. I will utter silent prayers over heat that spreads a circle across the glass-top stove and into the steel pot, feeble-bottomed but stout, with, on my honor, promise to protect no old-world cancerous castaways on my watch. And Bhoon. Bhoon like a grandmother, like your life depends on it. If a shalgam is not bhooned and no grandmother is there to seize the doy from your hand, is it still a shalgam? We will somberly proclaim this to be the alchemy of our DNA. We will perfect the dish, imagining the grandmothers into a Kodachrome era with brighter flavors, better fashion, and more precise truths. Tongues warm wagging, doys aloft. We will set it on a bed of basmati, ignoring inner voices that ask which grains were collected and deposited en route. We will use forks because we've forgotten how to use our fingers, and also because germs. We will imagine the future secure, chew thoughtfully, summon every ounce of effort to enjoy this resurrection of memory, forgetting until a grandmother cackles gonglu between mouthfuls that they had a whole other word for it, that there never was a family shalgam recipe because they called it something else. This is how we know it is okay to become a vegetarian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laila. I was not expecting that ending, but boy, it hits.
I, as an actual vegetarian, like I appreciate, I mean, you know, I don't share your cultural background, but I mean, that was just like, wow, okay. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Thanks so much. So we are going to be having a Q&A now for our readers. Thank you so much, all of you, for your wonderful readings tonight. I'm going to be reading anything that you put in the chat in the YouTube channel. We'll transpose over here and we'll ask them. But first, I'd like to start by circling back to something that that Jen had said in her talk earlier. She had talked about success and how that might mean different things for different people. And I'm wondering, from your standpoints right now, each of you, what is your I should say your next idea of success, because it's a moving target. It does move and change. So what's your next idea of success? What does success as a writer mean to you at this point? And I'm going to pick on someone. I'm going to choose you. I'm giving you a little bit of warning here, so I'm speaking slowly, but for this question, I'm going to go alphabetically. So I'm going to start with Andrew. Do you have an idea of what success might look like for you right now?
Curse the alphabet in my name. This is going to sound more morose than I think I mean it to, but right now, success for me is actually writing again, because I wrote about this in my essay, but that's the thing that the pandemic kind of kicked in the teeth for me. And I've been, plotting things and taking notes on things and inundating myself with material. But just, it's almost been like a constant low level sort of anxiety about actually putting pen to paper again. So, that's a big one. In terms of actual writing success, beyond actually writing again, I don't know. I kind of have this mindset of just not thinking about that and thinking more about the next thing and just getting it out of my head and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and whatever happens, happens. But I know that if I stop, these things don't stop populating my brain. So I try not to think of it in those terms, but also will fully confess that my day job, the thing that I rely on, is not this, it is editing. If I had to rely on this more, I might have more a plan in mind for that. But yeah, right now it's more the immediate of just, I need to pull my head out of my ass and get back to it.
That's totally fair, especially in these strange pandemic times. I think just writing is going to be a common successor.
I mean, I would love a 6 or 7 figure sale, but I'm also a realist.
Yeah, fair enough. Next in alphabetic line, I think, is you, Gavin. What does success look like for you right now?
Success right now, basically is like moving from one level to the next, and pretty much achieving the goals that I set for myself. So I set 1-year goals, a 5-year goal, a 10-year goal. So it's just trying to work as hard as possible to attain those things. In terms of writing, I am still working on the books that you mentioned in my bio, and just trying to promote this book that I have written now, and just try to get it out there and to get it as much youths to read and much families to read as well, and just to continue to work hard and to be a successful author.
Okay, fair enough. Laila, what would the next success be for you?
Yeah, I think I'm in a funny type of position, because I've been writing all my life, but I'm a bit older, and I'm only coming to a place right now where I am finalizing a major project. And so immediately, I think success would be bringing that project to completion and getting it published. But I've also started working on another project, so hopefully, which will turn into my first novel. So yeah, I think success would be finishing, getting this manuscript published, and then tackling that new project and really diving into it and understanding how that kind of animal works.
Finishing anything would be a success. I can barely finish my own sentences right now, so yeah, I can really identify with that. Natasha, what's your next big success?
So definitely like the same idea of finishing anything, even if it's a single piece, is always a success to me. But I always write I'm a very, very slow writer. And so that success is often like a little bit less tangible. And so the kind of immediate success that I can see kind of in the near future and around me is often community impact. So seeing, my friends and peers do well, whether it's finishing their manuscript, signing with an agent, getting deals, that kind of thing, that I find so rewarding, knowing that we're all part of each other's stories and all uplifting each other. And I think earlier as well, we talked about the kind of idea of scarcity of resources. And so it's really lovely, I think, to see community impact, whether it's in your own writing, your writing circles and peers, or with kind of more formal mentorship programs, seeing that as a kind of the other side of the coin to that.
It's a really great way to look at it. The bigger our community and the closer knit our community, the more successes we get to enjoy, because we get to share the success of our friends and colleagues, and that just uplifts us all. It's a really great point, Natasha. All right, so I don't have any questions yet from the YouTube chat, so I'll go on with our next one that I have here. Now it's pandemic, so maybe not considering pandemic, but other times, if you think about other times, what is your greatest challenge in writing? Is it actually just putting pen to paper or digits to keyboard, or is it finishing? Is it anything? So I'm not going to go alphabetical this time. So if anyone just wants to volunteer and answer, what is your greatest or the biggest, the most difficult part of your artistic process? What are you finding challenging?
I'll go. The biggest challenge for me personally is editing. Just to edit my own work and get it into the language and the narrative to flow at a certain level where the reader can really capture the reader's attention. So I find that editing is like the biggest challenge for me in writing. Other than that, like when I'm in the zone, when I'm writing, the creativity flows, but then at the very end, it's just to wrap it up into the masterpiece that I want it to be.
Anyone else for challenges? What do you find challenging in your artistic process?
I can go. I think for me, it's something that came up a little bit earlier. Some of it is just the material constraints and, finding a way to justify the time and the resources that it takes to actually to take this seriously, as opposed to pouring all my energy into a day job and a paycheck and whatnot. And I think it takes a lot of, I think I've benefited a ton from the kind of community support that Natasha was talking about earlier, and some of the work that Jen was talking about earlier as well. Just those very explicit and specific types of support have really enabled me to take it more seriously and to give it the kind of time and energy and resources that I think it deserves. But it's an ongoing struggle.
Very good acknowledgement. Yeah.
I think for me, the biggest challenge is always just putting the, as you said, like the keypad to the Word document or whatever it is. I find getting started really, really hard. And I can do like outlines for days, but when it comes to actually carving out that time and forcing myself to sit down, that's the biggest challenge and the most daunting task.
I think for me, two things come to mind. Both kind of a nature of what I do, as an editor outside of this. One is that I actually had to stop writing first drafts on my computer because it's too easy for me to go back and edit. I had to go back to writing by hand because it's the only way to actually keep myself moving forward. And also, I'm first and foremost a dialogue writer. I started with screenplays, and my love, of wanting to write came from film, despite reading my entire life. And so that's always my natural thing. And I get into a flow with that when I'm writing by hand that I don't when I'm typing. But the other sort of issue that I find gets in the way is, I think it was Natasha who said you're a slow writer. I'm maybe slow to sort of get started on something. I'm one of those people, I will plot and plan something for years, but I have really struggled to be professionally editing and writing at the same time. And so I will have to basically save my writing for gaps between contracts. And then for me, it's less of a marathon and more of a sprint. So I will get an idea out rather quickly. I think this thing was written, the first draft of this was written in a month, but it was a long. It was, I'm measure 1,000 times, cut once. So it was a lot of that. And also my first drafts are messy as hell. It is bare bones and dialogue stringing together plot threads as if, duct tape holding the world together. But yeah, the biggest issue is that I still, after 9 years being a freelancer, I still struggle to balance the two of them. So I wait for gaps between things. And so this is a weird thing to complain about. I'm not necessarily, but the more work you have, which is a very good thing, the less writing I'm doing, because I'm just not carving out those times unless I actually say, I'm going to take a week off from my day job. And then I can at least get started on something and the ball is rolling. Once the ball is rolling, I'm fine.
All right. Wishing you many rolling balls, because that's what we all need. Yeah. So we have a question from YouTube, and it comes from Drew. What mood draws out your best creativity? And I don't think creativity is a mood. So what is the mood that draws out your best creativity?
Who's an angry writer? That's what I want to know. Andrew, care to elaborate?
My mind works fastest when I'm angry. That's what it feels like. It's like almost an anxiety trigger where the brain feels like it's on fire. But also those are a lot of the stuff I tend to write is personally political. And so it kind of these days needs a lot of anger. There's not really a lot of comfort with those things, or with various things I deal with. There's also a lot of anger rolled up in the fact that like I'm angry that I have certain things I'm still working through in therapy and in my writing, which is cheap therapy. Yeah, so it definitely anger is like the spark. I need that. If I'm in a very comfortable, sort of relaxed sort of place, I'm not getting anything done. Maybe some painting, that's it.
Others? Natasha, what mood do you write in?
Yeah, I feel like this is evident from the pieces that I read today. But whenever I'm feeling nostalgic, or like thinking back to a really joyful memory, that I think is what happened. I think lately, anyway, is what happens to spark new work or get me back to the page. And in particular, it's very funny, but specifically if I'm feeling nostalgic on a rainy day, like if it's dreary out.
I think for me,
Sounds
it's
so poetic.
yeah, I think for me, it's probably sadness and loss. And I think Andrew said cheap therapy. I think that's definitely what it's been for me.
For me personally, it's when I'm anxious, like when I'm, having like moments of anxiety, that's when I write the best. It just flows.
That's great. That's handy, especially during these strange days. And speaking of which, our next question
I was
is all
going to
about
say,
these
this is a
strange days.
segue.
I had a dog named Segway once. No, I didn't, but it works. So we have another listener who is, or viewer, I guess, who is wondering how COVID has impacted you as writers and artists. How has the pandemic changed your writing or your writing practice?
I can go. Well, I got laid off, so now I have lots of time. It's great. Really happy. No, but in all honesty, yeah, definitely more time.
For me, I often get a lot of ideas by being out and about in the world. And so it's been, being under lockdown and not going out has been, I think, a little bit challenging when I'm trying to come up with new topics to write about and that kind of thing.
I'll go. For me personally, it has not really affected me personally because I published a book during COVID. So it was more so a driving force behind me personally in terms of like, okay, it's lockdown, you have all the time in the world to work on, to finish your book and to get it published. So that's what I did. Rather than, making it a sad moment, I decided to, take the bull by its horns and say, hey, publish.
I sort of alluded to it earlier that I feel like my writing's been the thing that got hit hardest by COVID. Part of that is, and this is so cliche to say, but I'm someone who, I love writing in cafes and restaurants and things like that. And just losing that, and not even necessarily with other people, although there's at least one other person I write with occasionally, and would love to do again. For the most part, it really has been this like just complete shuttering of momentum. Like I finished a couple of things that were already in draft stages, but between the start of COVID and now, I have written exactly one new short story that is an absolute mess of emotions, but I need something I need to get out. I don't know, it feels like, it very much feels like just a level of exhaustion. And part of that is, I'm an introvert, but I love living in a large city because you'll be able to feel the life around you. But even if you can sort of slip in invisible in it, and to have all that right out there, and to not have that sort of fueling you, as Natasha said, things like surroundings and whatnot, it's just felt like it sort of sapped that. So for me, my writing practice has just been inundating myself with as much pop culture. I think I've watched like almost 300 horror movies since October.
All right, so we're getting close to time. So I think I'm going to ask the question that we ask all of our Brockton guests, and Jen, we would love to hear from you too on this one. If you can chime in, please let us know a great book that you've read recently and one that you think folks should know more about, or it can be any time in the last year. If you haven't been able to read in the last year, it can just be a book that stayed with you. So just suggest a book for us and share the thing you loved about it so much.
Should I just do, okay, here. We've got a couple, but they're sitting right here beside me, and it's like I planned it. I just want to, this guy, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. So he is a writer for Westworld. This just won the National Book Award in the States. And it's written as a screenplay, parts of it. And it's written from the point of view of a I think, Asian American actor who's only known as like Kung Fu guy or like apprentice Kung Fu guy or, random Asian gangster as we appear in popular culture and movies and television. And the reason I love this book so much is that Charles is so funny, and he really pokes at the underbelly of sort of Asian diasporic identity, and also sort of right now the conversation about anti-Asian hate crimes and racism has been really loud. And I want to say that a lot of us have understood that this was an underbelly in our society for a really long time, and Charles has certainly known it, and he writes about it. So it's a wonderful book. It's a lot of fun. I know I said a lot of heavy stuff, but it actually is a lot of fun, especially when there's like kung fu fight scenes in like a Chinese restaurant. That's so cool.
I would also like to just second, I haven't read that one yet, but one of his previous books, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, is honestly one of my favorite, just for like fun and creativity and breaking the fourth wall. It's absolutely brilliant. I am currently reading, and it is absolutely fantastic and Lovecraftian, and but also not the bad kind of Lovecraftian, someone actually knowing Lovecraft's bullshit and taking it apart in a wonderful way. And I would definitely recommend that. And then I guess like, because I don't know how many people know about it, I go on and recommend what's actually my favorite book, which is a graphic novel, and it's called Day Tripper, and it's by a duo named Moon and Ba. And it is something that I've read probably 3 or 4 times in my life. And by the end of it, I am a sobbing, hideous mess of a person every time.
So I'm going to recommend 2 poetry collections. One is Lily Wang's Saturn Peach, and to me, it's like walking into a dream. I love it so much, and I come back to it a lot. And the other one that I'd recommend is Jay Simpson's It Was Never Gonna Be Okay.
So for me, I would say I have many stacks of books that I have yet to get through, or I'm halfway through. But the one book that I got, I raced through really fast last year was Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. It was a really fast read for me. It was a co-winner of the 2019 Booker Prize. And what I loved about it was just such a, in terms of, there's a nostalgia appeal to it in terms of, the lives of second and third and fourth and 700th wave feminists of color, navigating changing landscapes and building lives and engaging with each other. But it's written in a way that's very, very pacey and you get to see snapshots of different people's ways of kind of entry points. And it was I found it incredibly compelling, and it's just very, very relevant.
A book that I read last year was You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. It's basically a self-help guidebook in terms of like how you can heal your life, like heal the emotional traumas that you're going in your life by, coming face to face with them, addressing them, and just basically be at peace with yourself. It has really helped me personally, and so I've been using it as like a guide in terms of like how I deal with certain situations that I've encountered, how I deal with, how I move, moving into the future with my own personal self. So that has been a really good book that I've read last year, coming into this year as well.
One of the things I love so much about that question is the emotion behind it and how books have the power to change us or to make us be ourselves, feel more ourselves, things like that. So that's really, thank you so much for sharing all of these very personal choices. It's wonderful. Really appreciate it. And we very, very much appreciate you being here with us tonight. So we have Brockton coming up on May 12th, and yeah, Dorian, who we're gonna have.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming tonight. Please join us again right here, Ephemera, YouTube, online, where we will see Elizabeth Hurst, Teresa Stasian, Wabshiga Rice, and Ryan Kapp with a surprise guest speaker. We're very excited to be able to present some of these people. Some of them had to be canceled from last May, when we had to try and figure out how to do things online and couldn't until Ephemera came to rescue us. So please come May 12th to see these wonderful writers. And until then, see you on our Facebook, see you on Twitter, see you online, and keep being out there for each other.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.